As Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina resigned on Monday and fled the country, protesters stormed her residence in the capital of Dhaka and began looting one of the most protected buildings in the country. Elsewhere in the city, they chiselled away at the face of a statue of her father, state founder Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, with an axe. India's ANI news agency said 76-year-old Hasina landed at a military airfield near Delhi. Reuters could not immediately verify this, but commercial tracking services showed a Bangladesh Air Force plane leaving the country and flying west before it disappeared. The news of her exit was delivered by Army Chief General Waqar Uzzaman in a televised address. He said after a discussion with political leaders, an interim government would be formed.
Please keep faith and trust in the Army. I take the responsibility and I promise to protect the lives and property of the people. Don't lose faith in the Army. God willing, we will fulfill your demands and bring peace and harmony back to the country. I request to you all to support the Army and stop the violence, murders, hooliganism, and the protest.
Bangladesh has been engulfed by violence after student protests began against quotas, which reserve some public sector jobs for veterans of Bangladesh's 1971 independence war, in some of the worst violence since the birth of the South Asian nation more than 5 decades ago. About 250 people have been killed and thousands injured. It escalated into a campaign to oust Hasina, who won a 4th straight term in January in an election boycotted by the opposition. In defiance of a nationwide curfew, there was jubilation as thousands of people marched in the streets of the capital.
We will never forget the student martyrs who have freed us today. They will always be in our hearts.
Bangladesh's army chief is set to meet student protest leaders on Tuesday as the country awaits a new government. This comes a day after Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina resigned and fled the country following a violent uprising against her rule. The student leaders who spearheaded the protests against job quotas and called for Hasina's resignation are seeking an interim government with Nobel Peace Laureate Muhammad Yunus as its chief advisor. 3 organisers of the student movement released a Facebook video early on Tuesday outlining what they want. Nahid Islam is one of the movement's key leaders.
We will not accept any other government other than the one proposed by us. We will not accept the government supported by the military or the fascists. Any proxy government or government against the people will not be accepted.
He also claimed that Yunus has agreed to be the advisor of the interim government. 84-year-old Yunus and his Grameen Bank won the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize for work in alleviating poverty by granting tiny loans of under $100 to the rural poor in Bangladesh. He was indicted by a court in June on charges of embezzlement, which he denies. Yunus did not immediately respond to a request for comment. 76-year-old Hasina arrived at a military airfield near Delhi on Monday after leaving Dhaka, where she was met by India's national security advisor. Details about her plans remain unclear.
Chinese tech giants like Huawei and Baidu are stockpiling Samsung's cutting-edge AI chips as they await new US curbs on exports of the semiconductors to China. That's according to 3 sources. These companies, along with startups, have reportedly ramped up their buying of so-called HBM chips since early this year. One source said this has helped China account for about 30% of Samsung's HBM chip revenue in the first half of 2024. It all comes as US authorities are expected to unveil new export controls this month. The sources said the package is expected to lay out parameters for restricting HBM chip access. Reuters was unable to determine the details of the proposed chip restrictions or how they would impact China. The US Department of Commerce declined to comment, but said last week it was continually assessing the threat environment to safeguard the country's, quote, technological ecosystem. HBM chips are crucial components for technology, such as NVIDIA's graphics processing units, that can be used for generative AI work. There are only 3 major makers, SK Hynix and Samsung from South Korea, and US-based Micron Technology.
A U.S. judge ruled on Monday that Google violated antitrust law, spending billions of dollars to create an illegal monopoly and become the world's default search engine. It's the first big win for federal authorities taking on big tech's market dominance. Google controls about 90% of the online search market and 95% on smartphones. The ruling said it paid over $26 billion in 2021 alone to ensure that its search engine was the default on smartphones and browsers, and to keep its dominant market share. Parent firm Alphabet said it plans to appeal the ruling. The legal wrangling could play out into next year or even 2026. The decision paves the way for a second trial to determine potential fixes, including a possible breakup of Alphabet. That would change the landscape of the online advertising world that Google has dominated for years. Now the ruling is also a green light to aggressive U.S. antitrust enforcers prosecuting big tech, a sector that has been under fire from across the political spectrum. Shares of Alphabet fell 4.5% on Monday amid a broad decline in tech shares as the wider stock market plunged over fears of a recession.
The US is expected to propose barring Chinese software in autonomous vehicles in the coming weeks. That's according to sources briefed on the matter. They say the Biden administration plans to propose a rule that would bar Chinese software in vehicles in the US with so-called Level 3 automation and above. This would also ban autonomous vehicles produced by Chinese companies testing on US roads. These sources added that the administration also plans to ban cars with advanced wireless communication abilities developed by China. A Commerce Department spokesperson said on Sunday that it is, quote, concerned about the national security risks associated with connected technologies in connected vehicles. This includes worries that the connected cars could use the technology to listen into or record conversations, or take control of the vehicle itself. Under the proposal, first reported on by Reuters, the sources say automakers and suppliers would need to submit verifications confirming none of their connected vehicles or advanced software was developed in a, quote, foreign entity of concern like China.
Fitness coach Hamid Shafau is among those refusing to join nationwide protests in Nigeria, and he's got a valid reason. Nearly 4 years ago, he joined demonstrations against police brutality at the Lekki tollgate in Lagos.
We were there, it was a peaceful protest until governments ordered the military men to open the firearms. It was only God that saved me. We were many there.
What are we saying? Nigerians have again been protesting. This time it's economic hardship and crime that have brought hundreds of thousands onto the streets. And again, Nigerian police are being accused of using lethal force. Amnesty International says at least 13 people have been killed in clashes with police since the unrest began last Thursday. Police have put the death toll at 7, blaming some of the fatalities on accidents and an explosive device. The demonstrations were meant to continue until August 10th, but on Monday appeared to have fizzled out with only a few hundred protesters turning up in major cities. At the weekend, President Bola Tinubu called for a suspension of the protests in favour of dialogue. But the firm police response may also be a reason people have stayed at home.
Do you tell me the same governor, the government that doesn't care about the masses? Is it the same governor you want me to go and endanger my life again in this process?
For Shafau, a soaring cost of living in Nigeria is having a direct impact on his business. He says his clients have drastically reduced in number over the past year. But he adds he'd rather find alternative sources of income than join the protesters, and rather pray than put his life in the hands of the Nigerian government. Sudan's government on Sunday denied the existence of famine in North Darfur's Zamzam camp for internally displaced people. That contradicts the findings of a global food monitor. The Famine Review Committee said in a report on Thursday that famine, confirmed when acute malnutrition and mortality criteria are met, is ongoing in the camp and likely to persist until at least October. The finding by the Committee of Food Security Experts, linked to the globally recognized standard known as the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, is just the third time a famine classification has been made since the system was set up 20 years ago. And it comes after more than 15 months of war between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The conflict has created the world's biggest internal displacement crisis and left half the population, around 25 million people, in urgent need of humanitarian aid. Earlier this year, aid agency Médecins Sans Frontières said that one child was dying every 2 hours in the Zamzam camp. MSF said on Sunday that it only had enough therapeutic food to treat malnourished children there for another 2 weeks. But also on Sunday, Sudan's Federal Humanitarian Aid Commission said that talk of famine was inaccurate. The government body said conditions were not consistent with those that must be met to declare famine. Experts and United Nations officials say a famine classification could trigger a UN Security Council resolution, empowering agencies to deliver aid across borders to those most in need. However, Sudanese officials have said it could be a pretext for international intervention in the country. The Sudanese government blamed the Rapid Support Forces for imposing what it said was a blockade on North Darfur's capital, Al-Fasher, that has led to shortages of food and aid. The RSF on Friday declared full solidarity with the victims of the famine and repeated an offer to work with the United Nations to facilitate the delivery of aid.